Welcome back to Dan91's Garage, and in this episode I'm going to talk about how to fit a Civic half rad to the Starlet. I've already fitted one to mine. The thing is, there's not much to actually see on the car, which is why I'm going to show mainly photographs of the install I did. First of all, you need to choose the right radiator. So there's twin cores or triple cores. I went with the twin core simply because I didn't think I needed the triple cores capacity. I bought a Tegiwa one because it was on offer and it was supplied from the UK, and when I got it, I was pleased to notice that the fins to actually cool it are louvered as well, so that'll increase the surface area and make it more efficient. So after I bought the generic 10-inch slimline 12-volt 80-watt puller fan, went with a straight blade design on these because they're more efficient for their size. The straight blade is a bit noisier, but the curved blade is less efficient. So didn't get any cable tie brackets with this, so I needed to make some mounting brackets up. Started off with some cardboard templates, made them out of 2mm aluminium, and like I say, big cutout at the bottom so I could access the drain plug with a thin-walled socket, and decided to have both the lower mounting points on a single bracket to allow the upper mounts to be a bit smaller and easier to make. The bracket mounting surfaces for the radiator and fan need to be offset. The bits that bolt onto the radiator need to be further towards the rad than the other fan end. So I sort of like bent those up in a vise to offset the two mounting points. Drilled out some of the material to make it lighter, and obviously with the air blowing along you might want air to blow through it as well rather than hitting like a brick wall of a bracket. So I sanded the surfaces down with some 80 grit to remove some of the marks that I'd got in them from making them. Painted them up with some acid etch primer because it's bare aluminium, and then satin black top coat. Next thing is the wiring on the end of it isn't exactly for the Toyota, so I bought the Toyota radiator fan plug and pin set from eBay, and the fan comes wired as a puller. As it's mounted in the engine bay, it needs to pull cold air from outside through the radiator to cool it rather than blowing hot air from the engine bay through it outside, which obviously wouldn't work. So basically I chopped off the existing plug because I wanted to use a Toyota plug not only to keep it looking nice but also for the weather sealing of it. So obviously chopped off the plug and then stripped and crimped the replacement blade style contacts on. I'll put the obviously don't forget to put your rubber weather seals on first. So once I crimped all of that up, double checked the Toyota electrical workshop manual that I managed to get hold of. On the Toyota wiring loom, the white and black stripe is earth and the blue is for positive. So for me, on my fan, it was black to white and black, then red to blue. So I then plugged in the correct wires into each side of the plug so that the polarity would be right. It was time to take the old radiator out. So the old radiator, there's a couple of bolts on the top of it that hold down some brackets. So you undo those two, drain the coolant out of the radiator at the bottom using a petcock, which is a posh name for a little tappy thing that's on the bottom of it. Sometimes it's seized and just snaps off in your hand. And if that's the case, then you just undo the lower rad hose, pop that off, and then drain the coolant out into a suitable container. So once that's done, you can then take the top rad hose off. A bit more will probably leak out of that, but again, catch that, take the radiator out. Then you'll see two brackets at the bottom. The driver's side bracket, or sort of the right-hand side as you're sitting in the car, that just bolts to the sort of lower chassis member. And you just undo that. I think it's, from memory, they're M8 bolts, so it's a 12mm spanner for them, I think. Then onto the other side, on the passenger side, or the left-hand side of the vehicle, that one's actually spot welded to the front cross member, so you need to drill out the tops of the spot welds with I think I used an 8 or a 10mm drill. And then once you've weakened the spot welds enough, I then used a cold chisel, put it underneath, tapped it across, and once you've done that, it just breaks off whatever's left of the weld and you just pull the bracket off. Basically, the lower bracket bolts onto the same holes what the under tray is using to bolt the under tray on with. So when you take the under tray off, because everything's quite rusty, you usually just snap the heads off the bolts and you're left with bolts stuck in the chassis member. You can't really get them out because they're captive nuts. So I ended up having to drill a few of mine out because a couple of them broke off. So I had to drill them out, retap them M6, and then was able to attach my bracket. Those holes that you actually attach to are quite far back. So what I did was on the inside of the engine bay, there's like a lip. I drilled a couple of extra holes through that, and then drilled a couple of extra holes in the bracket itself that I'm using to hold the rad on, and then bolted it on there as well. So that gave me 4 rather than just 2, sort of pulling on the recently restored threads. Also, the back end of the bracket towards the car tips down. So what I was able to do was stick some washers on the under tray bolts So that then tilted the bracket a bit more horizontal. So once that's all bolted up, then you can drop your new radiator in. There's a couple of little rubber grommets that go in the bottom, a couple of little pegs on the bottom of the radiator which fits into those, and then you can attach your top bracket as well. The rubber grommet that came with my top bracket was too large, and the post on top of the radiator rattled around like a dick in a bowler hat, so I didn't really fancy letting that just twat itself stupid all the way down the road. So I stuck a smaller size grommet in that, which then tightened up the relationship between the top bracket and the top of the radiator. And that's the radiator in. I double checked the fan wiring using a drill battery, which was a 14.4 volt. So I did a little bit of a test there. It pulled cold air from outside the engine bay through the radiator. So the original radiators are 28mm inlet and outlet, and the bottom hose outlet is on the passenger side or the left-hand side of the vehicle. It is possible to find a Civic half rad with 28mm inlets. I think it was from a company called GPI Automotive, but they are only available from Europe. So basically I bought some replacement silicone radiator hoses from TT Racing on eBay and attached the bottom hose, which stretched over the radiator 32mm, fitting surprisingly well with a bit of car shampoo for lube, and the top section fitted to the thermo housing inlet fine. The problem is, because obviously now the lower hose, instead of being on the passenger side, is now pulled over into the middle of the engine bay, what happens is the corner of this hose that comes out of the thermostat cap folds pretty much down to half its width, and I didn't really like the look of that, so I decided to improve it. So I bought a 90-degree silicone bend and an alloy coupler. The 90-degree bend I got was actually slightly more than 90, and when compared to the 45-degree stock bend, it shows a good difference. So I cut the top off my brand new TT hose, ready to fit my 90-degree extension. So I assembled the new section into the top of the hose and manipulated it to fit the new position without any kinks or strain. So basically I've got the lower hose in now, and as we can see, if we come over here to the top, there's no kinks in this upper bend. It's working nicely with the 90 degrees here, so there's no pinch there. This is the aluminium hose joiner I put in, and that's obviously allowed me to lengthen this hose and twist the top half relative to the bottom half. So that's helped out a lot to make the new pipe essentially fit where it shouldn't, because the lower section of the hose is now over here rather than over in this corner where it used to be. And you see there's the clutch line. When this was all put into place, obviously because this pipe now pulls over that way, it started to rest on this clutch hard line. So originally there was a pipe clip holding it onto this, so I just simply unbolted that, took the pipe clip off, and then gently manipulated the hard steel line over to the right hand side, and now the hose is nice and clear of it, so if there is any movement or use, it won't batter the crap out of it. The top hose was quite easy to fit compared to that. It really did just slip on at this end. Obviously it's a 28mm fitting this end and the hose is 28mm, so it just slipped on that end, and the only things we had to deal with at this end, because the rad's thicker and this inlet here is also a bit longer, that started to push the pipe too far back, and again it started to kink and pinch on these bends. So all I did was trim about 25mm off of the hose itself. It was really tight to wiggle it on. Once I put some car shampoo on it as lube, wrestled it over the top of it with a whole bunch of swearing, and then just clamped it up with some worm drive clamps rather than using those sort of strange springy, I think they call them constant pressure clamps. I think the idea of them is, the spring ones is, as things expand underneath them, they sort of expand slightly with them, so they always put on a certain amount of pressure, rather than with a worm drive clamp that gets fixed like this. When things start to expand under them, it does put extra or less pressure depending on when things are expanding and contracting underneath them. I think that's the general idea of the spring clamps, although I hate them and they're just a bit of a sort of snappy pain in the arse basically. So that's that. This is obviously the Glanza overflow bottle, and as you can see, or maybe not depending on the lighting, it wraps around the battery here. So obviously with the battery in its forward position, because there's two positions for the battery, this doesn't fit, so you have to move the battery back. The tray itself, which I still have the original tray here, it's got some sort of round pins essentially that locate in holes in the actual metal tray on the chassis. I think it's positions A and B they're labelled up as. Either way, you lift the tray back into its further back position, And then obviously at the front here you can see there's 2 holes for the clamp, and you obviously move the clamp back as well, so then the actual battery tie down clamp holds it in the middle of the battery again. Then once you've done that, all you've got to do is hook up your overflow pipe, and then that's all the plumbing done. So I topped up the radiator, topped up the overflow bottle to the maximum line, and for this I used the Toyota Long Life Coolant Premixed Red. And once that's done, I was ready to bleed the cooling system to remove any air pockets before I could take the vehicle for a drive. And that's it. I think it's a nice neat job. Fits the car well. And like I say, there's plenty of room down there now, nothing in front. That's exactly where air filters and turbos and intercoolers need to be mounted. So there we go. That's how I installed a Civic half rad in my Toyota Starlet. Hope you enjoyed it. Don't forget to like and subscribe. And I'll see you on the next episode of Dan91's Garage.